Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be continuing our read through of this book called History of the World, Map by Map. And if you are new to this series or my channel, welcome. Thank you for clicking on this video. I am going through this book blind. We are reading it for the first time together. So I've not read any of these maps other than their titles in advance. So this is unscripted, just random, who knows what will happen. And we have a lot of maps to get through tonight. So let's just dive right in. As you can see by the title of this video, we are talking about the Cold War. So let's look at this map of the Cold War, and then we'll look at a bunch of others that involve the Cold War. My chair is so squeaky tonight, it's driving me insane. I'm sorry if it's so loud. It just has a mind of its own sometimes. So we're starting here with the foundation of NATO, 1949 to 2017, which I think 2017 is the year this book came out, or around that time. In the wake of World War II in 1949, the US, Canada, and 10 European nations signed the North Atlantic Treaty, which established NATO. It was a defensive military alliance that promised to provide mutual assistance if one nation were to be attacked. Greece and Turkey joined in 1952, West Germany in 1955, and Spain in 1982. After the end of the Cold War, NATO expanded into Eastern Europe to become an alliance of 29 states. I don't know the number now, but I know it's in the 30s for sure because Sweden just joined last year. I want to say it's like 33, but I don't know. Something like that. Then we have the foundation of the Warsaw Pact, 1955 to 1991. The Warsaw Pact was established by the USSR and 7 Eastern European allies in May 1995 in response to a rearmed West Germany joining NATO. The forces collaborated only once, intervening to end the Prague Spring Uprising, which occurred in Czechoslovakia in 1968. The Warsaw Pact collapsed at the end of the Cold War in July 1991. Then we have CENTO, which was 1955 to 1979. In 1955, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, Turkey, and the UK set up the Central Treaty Organization, or CENTO, originally known as the Baghdad Pact. Well, that has a ring to it. Oh well, it's a better name. Modeled on NATO, the organization's goal was to contain the USSR by linking the states that bordered it to the south. The organization was largely ineffectual and collapsed after the Iranian Revolution of 1979. There's a crescent moon and star to signify the CENTO Pact of 1959. We can see here Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, East Pakistan back then, and the UK. Yeah, I guess technically bordering, I guess, in a sense, like the last defense if the USSR were to just like cut through here, the UK would be there, I suppose. I'm not sure. Then we have wars by proxy, which we're going to look at maps for most of these in a minute. 1950 to 1991. The US and the USSR never fought each other directly during the Cold War, hence the name, as the nuclear stockpiles amassed by each side kept the two power blocs at peace in a state of permanent deterrence. However, both tried to increase their influence by intervening in conflicts, disputes, and civil wars around the world, notably in Berlin, 1948 to 1949, Korea, 1950 to 1953, Angola after 1961, Cuba in 1962, and Vietnam from 1946 to 1975. There's a little lightning bolt here for a Cold War flashpoint. Let's find them. We've got Guatemala, Cuba, Where else? Angola, of course. Cambodia. Vietnam. What else did it say? Korea. Turkey. Are these little flashpoints? Yeah. Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Germany. Iraq, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran. It was all over the place. I don't know if there's any more. Oh, China. Alright, let's get into these little boxes here. Tell us all about it. So here in Cuba, 1962, the world comes close to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which we'll probably read about on another map. There's a little base here. That means major Soviet overseas base, it says. And the blue is major U.S. and NATO overseas base. So there. 1954, the U.S. secretly backs a Guatemalan coup d'etat to remove a socialist leader. 1961, Western and communist countries begin to support different factions fighting for Angolan independence from Portugal. Let's see, 1977 to 1978, formerly USSR-backed Somalia invades communist Ethiopia. The USSR and Cuba support Ethiopia, and Somalia gains assistance from the US. See a base there in Yemen, and up there in, I guess, Saudi Arabia. Base in Libya, base in Algeria, Morocco, Gibraltar, Spain. It's up here. 1946 to 1953, the USSR attempts to force Turkey to allow it to freely use the Turkish Straits. Turkey refuses and looks to the US for support. Look at all the symbols all over the USA. What are the airplanes? US bomber base, US naval base, and US missile base. It's a lot. There's little submarines too. Major US fleet. That's what that stands for. Baffin Island, Greenland, Iceland, of course the UK. What's up here? 1948 to 1949, the USSR cuts off transportation into West Berlin during the Berlin blockade. Czechoslovakia, 1948, the Czechoslovak coup d'etat. 1968, the Prague Spring. 1956, Hungarian uprising. In 1960, there's a flashpoint. A U.S. spy. Goodness, this is pink words, or pink background, black words. Pink spy a U.S. spy. A U.S. spy aircraft is shot down in Soviet airspace. Based in Afghanistan, that'll come back to bite you, USSR. 1950-1953 is the Korean War. You can see blue bases all over here thanks to the end of World War II. 1954, 1955, and 1958, led by Mao Zedong, Chinese communists force back Taiwan. Taiwan receives support from the U.S., which we just kind of read about last video. 1967 to 1975, the U.S. backs the Khmer Republic during the Cambodian Civil War. Yeah, all kinds of mess. Just mess everywhere. All in order to avoid nuclear war. However, look at all the missile bases in the USSR. All throughout. Air bases. Yeah, let's talk about the Korean War. Let's rotate the book all the way this way and make it awkward for everyone. My chair's gonna squeak. Okay. Let's start with the North Korean attack. June to September 1950. At dawn on June 25th, 1950, North Korean troops launched a surprise attack across the 38th parallel against South Korea, rapidly capturing the South's capital, Seoul, and reaching almost to the south coast. By mid-September 1950, South Korea was reduced to a small pocket of land in the southeast corner of the peninsula, known as the Busan Perimeter. So main attacks from North Korea are purple arrows. Capital's a little red star. Extent of North Korean advance in September 15th, 1950, shown by a dotted line. Major battles are these crossed bayonets here. So let's see. Purple arrows going down all throughout South Korea. You can see the border here. There's Busan. And you can see a battle there. The capital, Pyongyang. There's got to be other battles, but I can see them. They're just not purple. So we'll talk about those later. The UN response. Hi, squeaky chair. September to October 1950. In response to the North Korean invasion, the UN Security Council, boycotted by the USSR, recommended member states support South Korea. In September 1950, UN troops led by U.S. General MacArthur landed at Incheon and then Busan in the south. Fearing encirclement, the North's troops withdrew. The UN troops then headed north to capture the capital Pyongyang and neared Chosun on the frontier with China. Let's see. Okay, so UN counterattack is blue arrows. The capital city, there's a blue star. Major battles is blue bayonets. We can see the U.S. fleet as these blue warships. UN landings is this weird symbol. The extent of UN advance, November 25th, 1950, is the blue dotted line. So let's see, we've got blue arrows, blue ships. Blue capital star there at Seoul. Let's see, off we go. Heading up here. All the way up here. Pushing north, 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 north. Around everywhere. And then here's the dotted line, how far the UN forces made it, backed by the US, of course. You can see how the warships going this way, that way. That's Incheon. It's the battle. And the battle there, Pyongyang. Going over here. And up from Japan too, can you see? Going to Busan. The Chinese invasion. Let me bring this back. Chinese invasion, October 1950 to January 1951. China warned the U.S. that it would intervene to support North Korea if troops crossed the 38th parallel. After UN troops crossed the divide, Chinese volunteers began to cross the frontier in October 1950. The main Chinese army crossed the border in November and pushed the UN forces southward, retaking Seoul and establishing a new front line across the south of the peninsula. The Chinese attack are yellow arrows, battles are yellow bayonets, and the extent of Chinese advance on January 26, 1951 is a yellow dotted line. So let's see these movements here. Here comes the Chinese coming from here, because of course this is China up here. Going all down to Pyongyang, pushing south, 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 and this is as far as they make it. Near Urjin, looks like there. Yeah, it's one step forward, two steps back in this war, isn't it? Which ends in a stalemate. January 1951 to July 1953. In the second half of January 1951, UN forces responded to the Chinese invasion, successfully containing two major Chinese attacks before launching a successful push northward in May 1951. I forgot to mention the battle right there. Anyway, the Chinese battle. What had been a mobile war now became static, and by November 1951 the war stabilized along a defensive line slightly north of the 38th parallel. Limited fighting continued for 2 years until July 1953, when a ceasefire was agreed upon. So UN counterattacks are now white arrows, and the ceasefire line on July 27th, 1953, shown by this solid and dotted line. Confused what that means, but anyway. Oh, I see, because that's the maritime and current line, which I'm pretty sure are the borders today between North and South Korea. Looks like it. And then the UN's coming. Here's the line right from the Chinese, and they're going up, established this line? I see you now. I get it. Let's read the little boxes. Let's start up here. Goodness, I hate the book is long. I like when it's wide. November 25th, 1950, the farthest advance of UN troops toward the Chinese border. This blue line. October 19th, 1950, Pyongyang's captured by the UN forces. September 15th, 1950, 40,000 UN troops plus 7,000 South Korean troops launch amphibious assault at Incheon and bombard the city before recapturing Seoul and heading north. That big battle. Let's start this side now. November 26th to December 13th, 1950, UN forces are encircled by Chinese troops at the Battle of Joseon Reservoir. Right there. July 27th, 1953, an armistice line is established close to the 38th parallel, which I'm pretty sure that is the border today. What's this town called? Panmunjom. Down here to the south, September 16th, 1950, U.S. troops head north from the Busan perimeter. September 16th to October 24th, 1950, the UN reinforcements arrive from Japan. And September 15th, 1950 is the southern limit of North Korea's advance. And they made it pretty close to getting the whole peninsula, didn't they? Pretty close. I've never seen Busan spelled with a P. I know it's Busan, right? It's a soft B/P sound, but I've always seen it spelled B-U-S-A-N, Busan. I mean, it could be either way. Anyway, I've never seen it spelled like Train to Busan, you know that movie? Oh, we're skipping some of these maps just to talk about the Cold War. We're skipping to rockets in the space race. This should be a good map. Starting with the Manhattan Project, 1939 to 1946. Following the discovery of nuclear fission in 1938, the U.S. set up a secret nuclear weapon program codenamed the Manhattan Project. By 1945, their team of scientists had built 3 nuclear bombs. After successfully testing the first bomb on July 16, 1945, in Alamogordo, New Mexico, the U.S. deployed the second and third on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, which we talked about back in the World War II maps. The unprecedented devastation caused by the bombs forced Japan's surrender in World War II. So the first nuclear bomb test is a light blue mushroom cloud, and the attacks on Japan are dark blue. So down here in Los Alamos, that's Trinity going off. And then over here in Japan, we have Little Boy in Hiroshima and Fat Man in Nagasaki, which my channel members can see when I visited a Manhattan Project site in Washington where they made the plutonium for Fat Man. Nuclear history is one of my nerdy subjects. I don't know. I think it was just learning about Chernobyl, and then that spiraled and it got out of control when the Chernobyl show came out. I got really into nuclear history. Don't ask, it's weird. But that's what I went on my birthday, because my birthday's August 9th. Fat Man was dropped on August 9th. And then I got to go to a Manhattan Project site. It was great. I tried to film an ASMR video. The audio came out not great. But channel members can watch the full video, or I made it as a short for everyone else. But that was my nerdy birthday trip last year, and I loved it. Birth of rocket power, 1942 to 1945. In 1942, a team of German scientists led by Werner von Braun developed the V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. During World War II, the Allies had bombed many German cities, so in retaliation, Germany launched a total of 3,172 V-2 rockets against Allied cities in Britain, Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, killing 9,000 people. The rockets traveled so fast that the Allies were unable to shoot them down. Wow. It's a lot more than I thought it was. V2 targeted countries are shown by this little explosion, and the test site is shown by this big boom, which is right here. And you can see all the attacks over here. I'm sure that's what that box is about, but I haven't read it yet. Rocket development, 1945 to 1957. More than 100 German scientists, including von Braun, surrendered to the U.S. after Germany's defeat in World War II. Many were hired to work on the U.S. weapons program. The USSR, meanwhile, took over Germany's V2 production facilities. Both the emerging superpowers then raced to be the first to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles and space rockets. In 1957, the USSR opened the world's first space launch facility, the Baikonur Cosmodrome. It's shown by this teal, I guess, rocket tower. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be, but there's the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which I've already done a video on that as well. Talking about Baikonur. 3, 4. Nuclear proliferation. 1945 to 2006. Determined to match the U.S.'s nuclear firepower, the USSR tested its first nuclear bomb in 1949. The two superpowers went on to enlarge their stocks of nuclear weapons and also developed the even more powerful thermonuclear bomb. Several other countries also acquired nuclear weapons. In 1968, many countries signed a treaty to curb the spread of nuclear weapons, nuclear non-proliferation. So test sites are shown by these red mushroom clouds. Areas of multiple sites are shown by these really big mushroom clouds. Nuclear superpowers are pink. Nuclear weapon state are yellow. So let's find them all. So many. Of course, we have out here in the Pacific. There. All over here, that's Nevada, which I used to live in Nevada. And there's a whole chunk of Nevada that you're not allowed to go to because of this. Sites over there. We've got Algeria, South Africa, way out here in the Atlantic Ocean, Brazil, big one down here in Australia, and over here, a little box about that. Now let's head over to Asia. Look at all this. Novaya Zemlya, that's the Tsar Bomba. All these, we can't even count all the little testing sites here, but you can see the big ones there and there. Here in China, Pakistan, India, North Korea, and then, of course, out here in the Marshalls, and up there too. Soviets reach space. Talk about the space race. 1957 to 1961. Is that ASMR? Space race, space race, space race, space race. Is that tingly? Space race, space race. I'm not sure. I guess. The USSR had early victories in the space race. Space race, space race. On October 4th, 1957, it became the first country to launch an artificial satellite into space, named Sputnik 1. Now that's tingly. Sputnik, Sputnik, Sputnik. Oh, that's really good. Sputnik, 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 Sputnik. Sputnik, 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 Sputnik. Oh, say it fast, it's very hard. Sputnik, 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 Sputnik. Oh, that's really good. Tingles. Oh my goodness. Sputnik 1. The satellite orbited the Earth for 3 months. In April 1961, the USSR launched its first manned space rocket, Vostok 1. Vostok, not as good. Which took cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin into space and made him the first human to orbit the Earth. In May 1961, President John F. Kennedy responded by declaring that the U.S. would put the first man on the moon. So further USSR space launch sites are these yellow rocket-looking guys, which you can see here, here, and there. And there. I think that's their current space center. For Russia, I should say. Race to the moon. 1958 to 1969. Stung by Soviet success in 1957, the U.S. made its mark in space at the launch of the satellite Explorer 1 in February 1958. How's that one? Explorer, kind of. Not as good as Sputnik. Later that year, the U.S. created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, an agency devoted to space exploration. During the 1960s, the U.S. and USSR raced to be the first nation to send a manned mission to the moon. The U.S. claimed this victory in July 1969 when Neil Armstrong became the first human to set foot on the moon. So U.S. space launch sites are shown by this purpley rocket, which we have here and there. They're labeled. We'll read about them. Let's start on boxes. Oh, there's one up here too. Kodak Launch Complex. I've never heard of that one. I wonder if that's still active. 1950s to present, Nevada test sites been used for more than 900 nuclear tests. Yeah, oh, there's another one. Vandenberg Air Force Base is a space launch site. I didn't know that. This one down here. That's for Europe. And then look at this one for France in Algeria. And then here for, oh my goodness, they're all over the place. U.S. space launch sites. Are they still purple? I guess so. There, for here, my goodness. Whoa. Well, we have India. I talked about that in the video too. All throughout China, North Korea, South Korea. Looks like South Korea there. Japan is two there. Australia's got one. There's one out here. That can't be right. These can't be U.S. Oh, I see. Other space launch sites are shown in slightly darker purple. I was about to say, these aren't all U.S. launch sites. That's way too many. So yeah, those are for Europe, Germany, Israel, Italy apparently has one down there, just for funsies. Anyway, back to reading boxes. 1945, the first nuclear bomb test is carried out in New Mexico. The blast is felt more than 100 miles or 160 kilometers away, and the mushroom cloud reaches a height of 7.5 miles, which is 12 kilometers. That was Trinity. 1942, Los Alamos is chosen as the site for the Manhattan Project. Read that backwards, but that's okay. This is the Wallops Flight Facility in Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport. This is Cape Canaveral Air Force Station and Kennedy Space Center. That's the Guiana Space Center for the ESA. 1970, it says, the European Space Agency, ESA, launches its first satellite from the Guiana Space Center in Kourou, French Guiana. Yeah, this is Broglio Space Center, operated by Italy. I don't think I'm going to read all of the space centers. 1966. Many countries claim that Israel has created its first nuclear weapon in December 1966, but Israel denies this allegation. 1944. V-2 rocket attacks result in almost 3,000 fatalities in London and surrounding areas. All the space centers all throughout Asia. Here's 1957 to 1990, more than 220 tests are conducted at Novaya Zemlya. Which I've done a video on that. Did I say that already? Probably. 1949, USSR conducts its first nuclear bomb test at Semipalatinsk test site, which I've also done a video on. I'll be able to say that about everywhere in the world eventually. Oh, I've done a video about that. 1964, China carries out its first nuclear test at Lop Nor. A total of 48 tests are conducted from 1964 to 1996. 1952, the first British nuclear test is conducted on the Montebello Islands in Australia. 1952, the U.S. tests its first thermonuclear bomb on the island of that. What does that say? Elugalob. Interesting. And 1954, the U.S. conducts its first thermonuclear test at the Bikini Atoll just that's how we have the name of the swimsuit. It's named after the Bikini Atoll. 1945, U.S. drops the first nuclear bomb over the Japanese city of Hiroshima on August 6th. The blast and its after effects claim up to 146,000 lives. In 2006, North Korea carries out its first nuclear test. Is that everything? I think so. All right. Civil rights protests, but that's not our topic today. We're talking about the Vietnam Wars next. We're long again. Where's the first box? Over here. Gotcha. War with France, 1946 to 1954. In 1941, the Vietnamese revolutionary Ho Chi Minh, in exile in China, organized the pro-communist Viet Minh nationalist movement to fight for an independent Vietnam. At the end of World War II, Ho returned home and declared Vietnam an independent republic on September 2nd, 1945. The French colonial rulers attempted to reestablish their control, leading to a lengthy civil war that started in 1946. The major battles are shown by these red bayonets, and French border posts captured by Viet Minh in 1951 is shown by these weird arrows. You can see them all up here, and over here, and then all these battles up. Oh, that's not that one. All these battles up here. War with France. Then the French are defeated. March 13th to May 7th, 1954. In 1954, the French enticed the Viet Minh into fighting a major battle. They occupied an old military base in Dien Bien Phu and supplied it by air, believing the Viet Minh to have no anti-aircraft guns. General Giap then encircled the French forces and used his heavy artillery to cut off their airborne supplies, forcing them to surrender. That battle's there. What a goof. Number 3, the Fight for Unity, 1954 to 1964. In 1954, the French signed the Geneva Accords, agreeing to the independence of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Vietnam was divided, with Ho Chi Minh ruling the communist north from Hanoi and a republic ruling the western-backed south from Saigon. Elections to unify the country were to be held in 1956, but South Vietnam refused to take part. Viet Minh fighters launched an insurgency to unify the country. So demarcation line along the 17th parallel shown by this purple line, which is right there. Vietnam's a narrow country there in the middle. Easy to draw that line on a map. War with the U.S., 1965 to 1973. In 1964, a reported North Vietnamese attack on U.S. ships in the Gulf of Tonkin led the U.S. to commit ground forces to Vietnam in 1965. They heavily bombed the north, but the North Vietnamese were skilled guerrilla fighters who infiltrated the south along the Ho Chi Minh and Sihanouk trails. U.S. bombers secretly extended the war to Cambodia and Laos, home of the communist Pathet Lao group. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is shown by this solid blue arrow, and the Sihanouk Trail shown by the dotted blue arrow. The western limit of Pathet Lao areas in 1967 is shown by these triangles. The U.S. forces are shown by these blue airplanes. Major battles with U.S. involvement between 1965 and 66 are these dark blue stars. 67 and 69 are light blue stars. So let's see. We have the Pathet Lao line coming through here, through Laos, or Lao, depending on where you're from. The official USA pronunciation, you say the S. In most countries, you don't. It's language is weird. All right, Ho Chi Minh Trail. You see coming down here, and these are mostly underground tunnels. And Sihanouk coming up through here. There. What else? The battles. Dark blue, dark blue, dark blue, dark blue, dark blue, dark blue, dark blue. Can you see? Yeah, okay. And light blue, light blue, light blue, light blue, light blue. And then airplanes, 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 airplanes. Here, oh, dark blue. I don't see any airplanes. Oh, there's one. The airplane's been spotted. I think that's it. Alright. Oh, just the U.S. forces. I see. That's just like where they're based. So that makes sense there in Danang. Major offenses, 1968. What is this? There's just a spot there. It's on the page. It's not. Okay. What the? Are those supposed to be there? Is that a printing error? I don't know. 1968 to 1972. Two major North Vietnamese offenses in 1968 and 1972 seriously weakened U.S. forces. First was the Tet Offensive in January 1968, in which the Viet Cong, or National Liberation Front, the Viet Minh's successor force based in South Vietnam, struck more than 100 towns and were fought off with many casualties. The Easter Offensive of 1972 saw the regular North Vietnamese army launch 3 attacks against the South Vietnamese army. The Tet Offensive is shown by these dark pink explosions, and the Easter Offensive is light pink explosions, as we can see. Boom, 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 boom. This is the Tet Offensive, by the way. Boom, 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 boom. My goodness. All throughout it. Can you make sure you can see the Tet Offensive? And then Easter is over here, there, and up here. I think that's it. But yeah, the Tet Offensive was like the biggest turning point in the war, easily. Then we have reunification, 1973 to 1975. Negotiations between the U.S. and North Vietnam led to the Paris Peace Accords of January 1973 and resulted in U.S. forces leaving Vietnam. Without U.S. support, South Vietnam was quickly overrun by Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces. With the fall of Saigon in 1975, Vietnam was now unified under the control of the North. So the Spring Offensive is blue explosions, and Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City, shown by this blue star, which is right here. So we've got blue explosion, blue, 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 and blue up here. And yeah, that was the Vietnam War. Or wars, I guess we talk about the Independence War too. Let's see what's happening up here. Late 1950s, North Vietnamese take control of Lao provinces at Phong Sali and Sam Nua. I probably butchered those, but you can see that's right here and right here. 1951, French win battle at VinhIen after a string of Viet Minh victories under General Giap. I'm sure I said that wrong too. My bad. 1951, Viet Minh seize French border posts to open up access from weapons from communist China during these things, I guess. What were these again? French border posts captured. So yeah, that's what that is. 1946, French naval bombardment of Haiphong precipitates the first Viet Minh attacks against the French. 1964, that's this right here. Reports of North Vietnamese attacks against U.S. warships at the Gulf of Tonkin prompt the U.S. to support any Southeast Asian country fighting communist aggression. Yeah, that didn't go well, did it? 1954, the French lose decisive battle at Dien Bien Phu. 1965 to 1969, the U.S. bombers attack areas of Laos held by pro-Viet Minh Pathet Lao guerrillas. 1954, Geneva Accords divide Vietnam along the 17th parallel. 1968, Viet Cong and South Vietnamese with U.S. forces fight a long and bloody battle for Hue. 1965, first U.S. forces arrive at Da Nang, ostensibly to protect its airbase. 1968, notorious massacre of 300 to 500 South Vietnamese civilians by U.S. soldiers at My Lai. Tragedy, of course. 1957 to 1975, Ho Chi Minh Trail allows communist forces to transport supplies from North Vietnam to the south. Speaking of which, 1966 to 1975, the Sihanouk Trail, like the Ho Chi Minh Trail, allowed communist forces to transport supplies to Cambodia. And then down here in Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City, 1975, the North Vietnamese take Saigon, and in 1976, it's renamed Ho Chi Minh City and becomes capital of unified communist Vietnam. Which, Hanoi's the capital today, so I wonder when that changed. I know that's one of those, when you're trying to name capital cities, kind of like, what's the capital of Canada? What's the capital of Australia? People sometimes think the capital of Vietnam. I almost said Vietnam. What in the world is that? Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh City, but it's Hanoi. So don't get it twisted. Today it's Hanoi. Alright, this is our last map of the night, and it's long again. Turn the book back around. Oh, this is such a pain. Guatemala. 1954 to 1996. Following a coup in 1944, Guatemala was led by the first two democratically elected presidents, Juan José Arevalo and Jacobo Arbenz. Both based many of their policies on U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. The U.S. government believed this new Guatemalan government to be pro-communist. And in 1954, the CIA funded an invasion to overthrow it, installing the dictator Carlos Castillo Armas. Guerrilla activity against the military government increased from the 1960s, leading to a civil war that ended in 1996. All because they confused socialism for communism. Big old difference. A lot of people still do that today, let's be real. Civil war shown by these two guys fighting. Military coup shown by this policeman. Guerrilla activity shown by a grenade, which you can just see down here in Guatemala. It's all happening down there in Guatemala, very sadly, at this time. Really horrible civil war there. It was a bad one, you guys. Let's talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. In 1959, Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba. Initially, the U.S. accepted his regime, but Cuba's links with the USSR soon soured relations. In early 1961, the U.S. cut off diplomatic ties with Cuba, and in April 1961, the U.S. attempted to overthrow Castro with the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. In October 1962, aerial images of Soviet nuclear missiles on board ships traveling toward Cuba convinced U.S. President John F. Kennedy to impose a blockade around Cuba. For 13 days, the two superpowers threatened global nuclear destruction. The blockade was eventually lifted after a tacit compromise between the U.S. and the USSR. So the potential range of Soviet missiles is shown by this pink, which you can see is all this here. Which I'm sure this is the important part, right? The USA, but yeah, they could have hit anywhere in like central and eastern USA. Soviet jet and missile bases are shown by pink airplanes, which you can see them all over Cuba here. The U.S. naval blockades here, all around Hispaniola, Jamaica, the Bahamas, and Cuba, blocking it all off. U.S. air bases are red, down there in Florida. And naval bases. This is red boat ship down here in Cuba as well, Guantanamo. intense time. I would be really anxious if I lived during that time. I can't imagine. It must have been just a nightmare. The Dominican Republic, 1961 to 1965. After the assassination of dictatorial President Rafael Trujillo in 1961, a left-wing democratic government under Juan Bosch left the Dominican Republic. Bosch was overthrown in a military coup in September 1963, but a pro-Bosch revolt soon broke out. Concerned that the situation was similar to events in Cuba, U.S. President Lyndon Johnson sent in troops to crush the uprising and allow a repressive government to take power. So another military coup shown by the red police guy there, and U.S. troops are shown by these red soldiers, which we could just see. Here they are in the Dominican Republic. I don't think these symbols are entirely necessary. We get it, but they're tiny countries. I guess the book's just doing its best. Let's talk about Chile. 1970 to 1989. In 1970, Salvador Allende became the president of Chile, the first Marxist to be elected through open elections. Opposition groups soon declared his rule unconstitutional, and he was overthrown by General Augusto Pinochet in a military coup, supported by the CIA in 1973. Pinochet's anti-communist dictatorship was marked by numerous human rights violations. That's putting it lightly, but he held on to power until 1989. Military coup shown by a yellow police officer down there in Santiago. Here's Chile. Let's move on to Nicaragua. You can see there's a theme here, right? That's the U.S. is like, we can't have that. Let's intervene. And they install a horrible dictator that just unleashes terror across these poor countries. Moving on, Nicaragua, 1979 to 1990. All to stick it to the Soviet Union, too. It's anyway. Installed with U.S. support in 1927, the Somoza family ruled Nicaragua until it was ousted by the Socialist Sandinista National Liberation Front, or FSLN, in 1979. At first, the U.S. supported the new government, but it suspended aid in 1980 when it came to light that Nicaragua was arming rebels in El Salvador. Under President Ronald Reagan, the CIA supported the Contra rebels who were fighting the Sandinista government. The FSLN was defeated at the polls in 1990. And so the Contra rebels are pink fists, revolution shown by purple fists, which you can just see them there in Nicaragua. And fighting up there, the border with Honduras, I suppose. Yeah, that was a scandal and a half. I imagine. Although I was alive, but I was a baby. But I imagine. Moving on to Panama, 1977 to 1999. U.S. relations with Panama had been difficult due to American ownership of the Panama Canal Zone since 1903. A treaty was eventually signed in 1977 to hand over the zone by 1999. But in 1989, American troops invaded Panama to seize leader General Manuel Noriega after he was indicted by federal grand juries on charges of drug trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering. Guerrilla activity shown by this blue grenade, which is just down here in Panama. There it is. You can see the Panama Canal right there. Then we have Haiti. High chair. We have Haiti, 1994 to 2004. The lengthy Duvalier family dictatorship was toppled in Haiti in 1986. In 1990, the radical priest Jean-Bertrand Aristide won the presidential election, but he was soon forced out by a military coup. The brutality of the military regime, along with the threat of a U.S. invasion, brought Aristide back to power in 1994. His second term, which began in 2000, was ended by a U.S.-backed coup in 2004, leading to Aristide's exile. So again, we've got military coup, U.S. troops, and they're just down here in Haiti, just doing that down there, which still chaos in Haiti to this day because of these events. Just destabilized a whole corner of the world for what? for what? Well, I guess at the time you think, oh, if there's so many communist countries down here, the Soviet Union's going to put all the missile bases and then we're done for it, right? I suppose that's the thought behind it. And I suppose hindsight is 2020. It's just, how many of these have the U.S. apologized for? I think they apologized for Contra. Maybe. I think that's it. Silly. Silly, I say, but it's tragic, more like. 1960 to 1996, civil war breaks out in between the Guatemalan government and left-wing groups. 1954, CIA-funded force of 480 men invades Guatemala. In the 1980s, the U.S. establishes a military presence in Honduras. 1984 to 1990, Contra rebels, who are largely based in Honduras, attack the Nicaraguan Sandinista government, and they're funded by the U.S. In 1999, the U.S. returns control of the Panama Canal Zone to the government of Panama, and it should stay that way. 1962, the U.S. enforces a naval blockade of Cuba, shaped like a gouache stone. I'm going to shut up. 1961, Cuban exiles supported by the CIA attempt to invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. Big mistake. In 1962, the USSR, the USSR builds missile bases in Cuba. Big mistake. 1962, the U.S. Task Force 136 patrols the sea in a blockade of Cuba. Oh, I see. U.S. Task Force 136 patrols the seas in the blockade. That's what that is. That's not Guantanamo, I suppose. What's the white dot? Is that Guantanamo? White dot. Where's the key? It doesn't say. I don't see it anywhere. I'm gonna assume that's what that is. Over here, 1983, we didn't even talk about Grenada. The U.S. intervenes in Grenada to oust the island's revolutionary government. And that's it. Alright, so we have so much mess around the world just because these two superpowers are just trying not to fight each other, because if they did, the world would end. See, that's what's so interesting about nuclear weapons, is that it's humanity's biggest mistake. Humanity's biggest regret. It should have never, ever happened. And it's like, oh, if we had it, then World War II wouldn't have ended in Japan. Yes, it would have. Absolutely. There would have probably been a lot more bloodshed on the ground between ground soldiers, or at sea, in the air. But look at the ripple effect, right? All of this unnecessary fighting. This really upsets me. I don't like those spots there. But that's it for tonight. We're not going to talk about it too much because I'm going to get upset. So next time, let me go back to these maps. We're going to talk about decolonization. My maps on maps of colonization, colonialization, were really big. Like, a lot of people watch those because it was back in like the scramble for Africa during all those times. So this is decolonization. So I wonder how well that's going to do. So we're going to talk about decolonization of Southeast Asia. There's Sukarno down there. All this mess. We'll talk more about the war there, I suppose. European unity, forming the EU. And Africa. It's going to be an interesting map. There's a lot of writing. I'm not looking at the words. I guess I'm looking at the words. I'm just not reading them. I'm just seeing a lot of them. Not going to read that just yet. Next week we will. Right? Next week or 2 weeks? Let me see my calendar. Oh, 2 weeks. Next week we're going to do History Magazine. So we'll do it in 2 weeks. So look forward to that. It's almost an hour video. So let me just end it. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a good night. Sputnik, good night. Good night. And cut.